let's go ahead and get started. And I just want to say a word of welcome to everybody. I am thrilled. I've been waiting for this night to have a chance to talk to my dear friend, Claudia Allen, and a tremendous professional clinical psychologist and who can share with us tonight. And I welcome all of you, any parents or grandparents and teachers and anybody who cares about children who's with us tonight. My name is Janet Hatfield-LeGros, and I am one of the pastors here at First Presbyterian Church. And Christy Harmon, who is our children's ministry coordinator, is also here with us. And before we get started, I'd like to start off with a prayer. Let us pray. Dear God, whose name is love, be with us and in us tonight as we talk together and learn. Be with every child, the child who is on our heart and mind right now, and all the children we have never met. Help us to find a million ways to care for them, love them, help them, and assure them that they are never alone. And dear God, be with every parent. Help us to find a million ways to care for them, love them, help them, and assure them that they are never alone. Amen.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to again welcome everybody here tonight. I am so thrilled to introduce Claudia Worrell Allen to you, a fellow New Hampshireite. I have to say right in the beginning, we're both from New Hampshire. And Claudia is a dear friend from Charlottesville, and we raised our children together. And she's one of the people I respect most in my life. So I'm just thrilled, Claudia, that you're here. Thank you so much for doing this. I don't want to waste a lot of time because we have a lot of questions that we want to ask Claudia tonight about ways to nurture and support children, especially in the area of mental health and well-being. And I want to tell people that we have collected questions ahead of time. People emailed us questions, but you can, there's a couple ways you could add questions that might come to you during the evening. There's a comment section in the YouTube. And so you're welcome to put a question or a comment in the YouTube, and Brick Cash, who's our IT person, will be collecting those and sharing those with us. And we're going to try to get to those questions. If we aren't able to get to those, Joe Allen, who happens to be married to Claudia Allen, will be speaking tomorrow night. And we may pass a few questions on to him for tomorrow night. But also you can certainly email if you have questions and you'd like it to be anonymous. Feel free to email Christy or myself, and we will bring those questions to Joe tomorrow night so that we'll make sure we can try to address those. I just want to give a brief introduction about Claudia before we get started. Claudia is a clinical psychologist, and she's the director of the Family Stress Clinic at UVA. She's also a professor of behavioral medicine in the family medicine area of the UVA Medical School. She's also taught in the Department of Pediatrics. Her clinical interests include family therapy, resilience and self-care in the helping professions, problems in parenting, yay, problems in parenting, marital and family issues, grief, and strengthening healthy coping skills. And in addition to all her professional identity and professional skills, Claudia and her husband, Joe, who will speak tomorrow night, are parents of 3 grown children, and they are in many, many ways go-to people in the neighborhood that we lived in together and among our friends for parenting questions and wisdom and counsel. And so Claudia, I'm really, really grateful that you're here tonight. And I'm wondering if you would just start out by sharing with us what you're working on these days, what the focus of your work is, and maybe even your particular interest, what you're seeing that is really important to you right now.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you, Janet, for that lovely introduction. And hello, everybody who's here. Thank you so much for having me to your church community. I really, really am honored to be asked to come just converse with you all about these issues. And truly, talking about parenting and kind of families and how families solve problems is probably one of my very favorite things to talk about. I just find it just infinitely interesting and always changing and just so important and so hard. Parenting is so hard. And so the more we can all talk with each other and share our ideas and lean on each other, the better. So in terms of what I'm working on these days, as Janet said, I run this little clinic called the Family Stress Clinic at UVA, where we see families and individuals for psychological support, people of all ages and from all backgrounds. And I also train family doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists who are in training as to how to work with families and children and kind of about child development, what's normal, what's concerning, how to best intervene, how to support parents, how to help parents keep growing as people. I'm all about the growth mindset with both kids and parents. I have my oldest is 30, and I am truly continuing to learn and grow as a parent every day, all the time. It's a constant journey. So in terms of what we're particularly working on right now, not surprisingly, we're trying to provide a lot of support to families during this pandemic. Normally I meet with people in person, but as of last March, we moved to seeing people virtually online, on Zoom, on FaceTime, on these different platforms. And, never cut down our schedule. Like, our schedule's been full of people needing to meet that way the whole year. It's actually been really fun and interesting to Zoom into people's homes. Kids love to walk you around their bedroom and show you all their stuff. They love to walk you into their parents' bedroom and show you their parents' stuff. And it's been that's been just kind of like a surprising little silver lining to this whole thing. And now, of course, for a while we were working mainly with helping families cope with trying to work and take care of kids at the same time, right? That's the huge one. And then also, as the isolation went on and on, trying to help a lot of kids with the anxiety and depression that can come with that. And now we're doing that work too, but also trying to help people figure out how to transition back to a more in-person life, which has its own challenges. Mm-hmm. That's something that people are asking us about a lot these days. Most kids are delighted to go back to school, but there are some kids and teenagers and adults who are afraid to go back and it's kind of a little bit safer to stay home on Zoom. So we're working with a lot of families to help transition the kids and teens back into real life, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes me that makes me think we should jump right ahead to the question of anxiety, because we have a whole list here, and Christy and I will just jump around and ask different questions depending on what you say. But since you brought up anxiety, and especially the anxiety about going back to school, there was a question that was asked about anxiety exploding, especially with young children, that it seemed to this parent that it had often been an issue for older children, but it seems to be getting younger and younger. And the parent was curious about what to make of that. Where is that coming from, and what strategies you might share with
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. We are definitely seeing that as well. And I think to answer first, where's that coming from? I think it is coming from the fact that all of our routines got shut down. And anxiety is something that thrives on um, kind of not having regular exposure to new experiences and challenges. So it's kind of like, you know, how you feel the most nervous about school or work on Sunday night because you've been maybe away from it for a couple of days. And then by Wednesday, you're feeling like, I got this. That's just anxiety in a nutshell, that the more we're out there in the world, being with people, trying new things, going to school, going to work, taking the bus, whatever it is we do, the more we adapt to that and feel competent for the most part, feel mostly like, at least, okay, I've got this. Like maybe we have problems, but we get through the day. And then when you shut people down and tell them to stay home, the outside world is dangerous. Well, first of all, they absorb that message and that makes kids scared. But also, when you shut down those experiences, everything starts to feel harder and scarier. And the longer you stay shut in your house, not doing much, the scarier and harder those outside activities start to become. So we've seen kids who maybe already had some anxiety issues get more anxious, but we've also seen some kids and teens who had no prior history of anxiety suddenly afraid to leave the house, literally. And that's how anxiety works. It gets its little foot in the door, makes you not want to do anything, and then it just grows. And so luckily, anxiety, that kind of anxiety is very treatable, both professionally, but also by parents. And how you treat that is you try to press on it. You don't give it room. You don't say, oh, you're scared to go to school, let's stay home. You more say, okay, you're scared to go to school. I can understand that. I was a little nervous going back to work too. First of all, tell me about it. What's scary? And then start to take steps to press on that. So, maybe at first your kid is literally just getting used to spending more time outside, like literally outside, or driving in the car to the store or to the park. Or, maybe they need to have one friend over first, or maybe they need to go to the school and hang out on the playground for a little bit first. So you're warming them back up, exposing them is what we call it, to that scary stimulation. And then you gradually build on it. Once they've gotten used to hanging around the playground, then you go in the classroom. And once they've spent, a little time in the classroom, then you spend half a day in the classroom, et cetera. Kind of like you did when they were preschool. You're just doing it all over again, even though they're 8 or maybe 18. So really being in a supportive way, really encouraging kids and adults to get out there and expose themselves to that stuff that we're not used to anymore. I would say one of the biggest challenges to this is us, the adults. We've gotten used to having our kids at home. As parents, you're most comfortable when your kid is sitting right in front of you and you can see that they're safe, like on some level, right? That can drive you crazy too, but they're safe. And so we've gotten really used to that. So now the idea that they're getting on a bus, or they're walking down the street, or they're going to a school where there might be bullies or germs, there are a lot of parents who are dragging their heels about this. So if you're one of those parents, and I personally can understand that, remember that your kids need to get out there and have those experiences with other people to develop social skills, problem solving skills, confidence, competence. And so if you're having a lot of anxiety with that, talk to your spouse, talk to your friend, talk to Christy and Janet, work that out, because your kids need you to support them in going back out into the world.
It makes me think about what we're trying to do this summer is just trying gatherings, just starting out to try to have some outdoor gatherings together, so that you've just put it in this context for me of we're all sort of putting our toe back in the water.
Exactly. And those outdoor gatherings that are kind of informal and more for fun, they're not like they don't have the added demands of school, right?
Mhm.
That seems like actually a really good transitional space to be working in.
Mhm.
Good to hear. I like the analogy of almost going back to preschool, because you don't put your child in preschool 5 days a week every day. You just ease them into it. So that feels a lot safer to, I would think, the parent and the child.
Mhm.
Yeah. Christy, do you have a question you wanted?
Sure. Well, I did. One of the questions I wanted to ask was, what have been the most effective coping skills you have practiced in the last 3 years? You know, they kind of go through, what are some of the coping skills we can teach our children to use when they're anxious, when they're feeling overwhelming emotion?
Sure. So one of the things that parents can really help kids with a lot is putting words to those feelings. So when you're a young kid, you just have those butterflies in your stomach, or you have a stomach ache or a headache, or you just feel awful. And you don't necessarily know even what the words are to share that with your parent. But as a parent, you can try some words out. You could say, you look sort of nervous. Are you feeling sort of nervous? What might you be feeling nervous about? Or you look like you looked kind of scared when we said that school's going to be opening back up. It can be really scary to think about going back into like a new place that you haven't been for a long time. Does it feel scary to you? And then you're reading your child to see, does that word seem to resonate? And if it does, you continue down that path. If they're sort of like, no, like, you're barking up the wrong tree here, then you just kind of back up and say, okay, so not scared, but you do look upset. Tell me what you are feeling then. Are you feeling kind of mad? Are you feeling a little overwhelmed by the idea? So you're sort of, you're sort of a little bit of a detective until you find the right words. But once kids can connect words to those feelings, they can cope much better, because then the next time they can come to you and say, yeah, I'm feeling nervous, or I'm feeling, mad, whatever it is, and can start a dialogue with you. And that opens the door to you being able to support them and problem solve. So putting words to feelings is, I know it sounds really simple, but it's really effective.
Are there do's and don'ts of things? Are there things that you can say that would shut that conversation down, or, discourage the child from opening up to you? What are some do's and don'ts of
Yes.
talking to your children?
Yeah. So you're aiming for that fine line, or for that sweet spot. You're aiming for the sweet spot where you're empathically responding, but you're not overreacting. So kids might share with you a problem at school, like somebody was mean to me, or, I didn't have anybody to sit with at lunch. If they think that you're going to empathically understand and be like, oh, that sounds hard. Tell me about it. Where was your friend Leela? Whatever. But not be like, oh my God, that's terrible. You poor thing. They don't want you to go in that overreaction direction. They will just shut right down. And of course, they don't want you to just blow it off and say like, well, why didn't you go sit with your friends? So you're aiming for that empathic but calm sweet spot, so that they tell you about a problem, you'll understand, but you won't act like it's a tragedy. Because if you act like it's a tragedy, it makes them feel worse. And so then they won't tell you. So that's one of my major do's and don'ts. The other thing is, don't expect every meaningful conversation to be a long conversation. Sometimes I suggest what I call hit and run. This is especially with older kids, with teens, and Joe will maybe talk more about this tomorrow. But, teens and even middle schoolers, they don't want to have, or oftentimes they don't want to have sort of a really emotional conversation that goes on and on. They just dread that. But if you can come into the room and like, if you notice that they're looking kind of out of sorts or something, or maybe you know something difficult has happened, if you can just kind of come into the room and say something just kind of supportive or empathic, like, hey, it looks like you had a long day. There's a snack in on the kitchen table for whenever you're ready. Then walk out of the room. Unless they say something to you. If they start the conversation with you and say, yeah, it was a horrible day, blah, 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 fine, go with it. But if they just don't really say anything, just kind of make your empathic gesture and then hightail it out of there and give them space. And then you've planted a seed that, mom or dad cares, mom or dad notices, oh yeah, I am feeling a little this way or that. And they might seek you out later, or it might just percolate in their mind. Don't be too discouraged if you say something either empathic or kind to them or instructive to them and they don't agree with you. If they just like grunt or something, that doesn't mean that they're not listening. And don't try to insist that they have to agree with you or something. Just make your comment and then move on, and know that, even when kids aren't looking like they're listening, it's oftentimes sinking in.
Yeah, you make me think, Claudia. Maybe it was you who shared this with me, but somebody said that the most important word in parenting is "mm-hmm," and that when they whatever they share with you, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, and that is a sort of go-to when I want to jump and explode and to keep me close in. And that connects to another question that the parents brought about what do you do when your children are young, your instinct is to be more restrictive as parents, and we have all these goals, restricting screens and restricting sugar, restricting all kinds of things to sort of keep their childhood. But then you get then it's the struggle to figure out when to loosen the restrictions, how to loosen the restrictions. And where agency fits in for children, and especially now where we're on screens so much, and social media is another question that's coming up. So anything on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to, I think, kind of keep in mind the principle that children are constantly learning and practicing the skills that they need to become independent adults. So even when they're 5 and they're learning to tie their shoes, that's still a basic independent skill that they're learning. And so at each developmental level, at each stage along the way, the skills that you're allowing them to try on their own or with just a little bit of support should get gradually more and more challenging. So for all people, not just kids, all of our behavior is motivated by trying to do one of 3 things. We're always trying to feel connected, or we're trying to feel like autonomous beings in the world, like we have free will, or we're trying to feel competent in the world. Because that's what you need to survive and thrive, right? Is to be competent enough to get the job done, autonomous enough to live your own life, and connected to other people. Mm-hmm. So I try to have parents kind of keep those 3 principles in mind at every developmental stage. So whether the child is 5 or 10 or 15, what do they need to be allowed to be working on their own right now to develop a little more autonomy? At 5, it might be, what shirt am I wearing? At 10, it might be, how much time do I spend with my friends, or what club or instrument do I want to play, or whatever. And at 15, it's things like, getting my learner's permit and that kind of thing. But I think if you check in with yourself around those 3 principles, is what does my child need to be connected, to feel age-appropriate levels of autonomy and competence that can help you decide whether something is appropriate at any given age.
Is that some of the root of the struggles kids are going through right now? Because of, when I think of autonomy, when I think of connectedness, and even competency, where you're just, you're having
Yes,
to do things.
you are so right, Jen. I hadn't even really made that explicit connection. Yes, you're absolutely 100% right. All three of those trajectories have been completely derailed, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that older teens or middle school to teens are having a harder time with this than young children. It's because young children, it's still really okay to spend a ton of time at home with mom and dad and siblings. That's not really disrupting their autonomy. Their autonomy is still kind of within the home sphere. Whereas, right, 12, 14, 16, 18, you're needing to be out there away from home at school or with friends or whatever. And so they are suffering. Those kids, those older kids are suffering so much because they're not getting as much chance to be autonomous. They're not practicing the competencies. They are, some of them. They're not practicing a lot of the competencies they need. And, their only connection is on screens.
Yeah. Or some of the competencies that they were beginning to really feel good about, a sport or a
Absolutely.
musical instrument or something, and they were kind of, ready to go, and it got stopped.
Absolutely. Yes. And sports and instruments and friends are what help kids feel okay about themselves, right? It helps them feel good, even though life is hard and they feel awkward and maybe they're not good at math. And, we've taken all that stuff away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of not good at math, there was a question about when your child is struggling academically.
Mm-hmm. How
do you support them and help them without hurting their self-esteem? How do you?
Yeah. So I mentioned when we were just chatting, I think, or maybe it was during the intro, that I'm all about the growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably, many of you, I'm sure Christy and Janet, are familiar with this work. It's by this woman, Carol Dweck, Dweck. And she has a whole lot of research on how kids learn better. People, not just kids, people learn better and perform better when they have a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is, I'm not good at math. I am good at math. A growth mindset is, these math problems are new to me. It's going to take me a while to figure out how to do them. I might not get them all right, but if I get interested in it and really stick with it, I'll probably get quite a bit better at it. If I don't, because it's something I'm not interested in, I probably will never get very good at it. So when your child is struggling academically, or with anything really, with any kind of competence, I think you want to first sort of notice their level of engagement. So if they are engaged, but they're struggling, then you want to really reinforce their engagement. So even if they're getting, an F on the practice test, but they're really trying and working on it and digging in, you want to be like, boy, you are really working hard on that. And those are some pretty hard problems. You're really using some persistence there. How's it going? And if a kid is not engaged, then you want to find out like what's behind that, because sometimes what's behind that is like a fear of failure or a fear of disappointing you. So it's really important that the kid know that what you care about is that they're trying, that they're learning, that they're moving forward, that they're engaged, and not necessarily that they're great at it. So, and this part is kind of counterintuitive. If your child, say, is good at something, whatever it is, math, lacrosse, drawing, be careful not to lock them into a box by giving them too much praise about their achievement. So say they're a really avid lacrosse player and quite good at it. It's dangerous to say, you are so good at lacrosse. You are such a star. Because then they start to feel locked into that. And they start to think that, oh, what mom cares about is that I'm a star. I better not try anything where I'm not a star. So I better just stick with lacrosse. And if lacrosse doesn't go well, boy, that's going to be devastating. Whereas instead, if you truly observe your kid and you can see they're really enjoying themselves and wow, they got so much better at their stick work this season or whatever. So you're better off noticing, wow, I see how much you really enjoy being out on that field. And man, I noticed that your stick work has really improved since you've been working with your coach on that. That's pretty impressive for like just a few months. How do you feel about it? So this leaves them a little bit more open to then maybe try something. You basically praised them for sticking with something where they weren't very good at it for a while. And that's going to make them more comfortable trying something else that maybe they're interested in, but they don't know how to do from Adam, and so they're not going to be very good at it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talked about, whether we try to reinforce that or not. Sometimes it happens that kids, whether they get reinforcement from their peers, oh, you're great at that, that's your thing, you're the star, or whether we inadvertently do it. It made me think of, and say they go to college and that's just not, they don't shine anymore. How do we teach our children resilience? How do they bounce back when they are given tough pills to swallow?
Yeah. So one thing that we as parents can do is to model for them how we handle our own setbacks. So sometimes we think that we're supposed to make everything look successful and easy, right? So that kids will know they can rely on us, they'll look up to us, whatever. Sort of true, but in reality, we're great examples of how to navigate the world. So if you can share with your kid that, you're disappointed with how a project at work went, and you realize now that you didn't start on it soon enough, didn't give yourself enough time for it, and boy, next month when that same project comes around, you're going to get started a week sooner, and to share in a genuine way, not in a lessony sort of way, but really to share that, then they learn mom's not perfect. That's okay. She's learning from her mistakes. She's not acting like it's a tragedy that her project didn't go well, but she's being honest that she's kind of disappointed. So modeling that, and I know that doesn't answer the question of if your child has a specific problem, like what you do in that moment, and I'll get to that in a second. But just as a more general matter, let your child hear about it when something goes wrong. Let your child hear you talk out loud when you say, like Janet, I remember when you went on your Outward Bound trip. So I'm just imagining before you went, you saying, out loud to your girls or in front of your girls, something like, oh, I'm excited, but I'm nervous. I hope it goes okay. I hope I haven't bitten off more than I can chew. I hope I'm not the slowest one, but oh, it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Sharing that kind of thing is really, really helpful. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, do not overshare, meaning share things that are age appropriate and not overwhelming. If you're, really struggling at work and maybe about to get fired, that's not something that you're going to share over the dinner table. You might have to share that with your kids at some point, right? But you're not going to be angsting in front of a 12-year-old about that, because that's too much for them. So share those day-to-day things that, they can hear. That's really helpful, I think.
Yeah. And that is a question, I think, that is, especially now when there's so much there are so many hard things going on
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
world, and they take it in no matter how old they are. There was a question about substance abuse in families, and sort of how it affects young children, and that it seems to be spiking. And it just, to me, is an example of that's a hard reality that a family might be dealing with, and among other hard realities. And how do you talk about things? And you can also address substance abuse as well, but that seems like an example of there are hard things.
Yep. So if it's a hard thing, like, someone in the family is having a substance abuse problem, or maybe one of the parents is experiencing a significant depression, or maybe parents are getting divorced, or maybe mom or dad did lose their job due to the pandemic or something else. What's important is to always have what you say be honest, be true, but titrate how much you say. So don't make up stories to cover up problems that will totally backfire. But say a parent is or a teen, say someone in the family is having an active substance abuse problem. It's happening right in front of everybody. And a young kid says, what's wrong with, Aunt Sally? Don't make up a story. Instead, be honest but simple. Like, Aunt Sally's having trouble taking too much of her medicine. It's making her sick. Daddy and I are talking with her and are going to help her get better. So keep it limited, and then make clear that the adults have a plan. Okay, that's just really important. So if kids feel like there are some adults in the family or in the neighborhood or whatever who have a plan to address whatever this issue is, they can handle a lot. They can handle a lot. You don't have to explain the plan in any detail, but just so that they know, okay, my mom or my dad has some other adult who's going to help them with this. It's not my job as a kid to help them figure this out. That's really, really important. And when I say keep the amount of information limited, read your child by this. So if your child asks about somebody's problem and you say, yeah, you're right. Daddy really is feeling really down these days. He has something you might have heard of. It's called depression. We're taking him to the doctor tomorrow. Then leave it at that. If the kid then asks questions, an older child might ask questions and say, well, what does that mean? What's going to happen? Or what is the doctor going to do? Answer that question, but sort of briefly, and then pause. So you respond to their level of questions. If they sometimes don't ask questions, and it surprises us, like we say something big, like some relative has a serious illness or something, we say, yes, Aunt Sarah has cancer. And then they say, and they walk out of the room. And you're thinking, wow, really? Well, that's just because that's how they're processing it. And probably they may well, like an 8-year-old might well do that, might walk out of the room and say nothing. It's not because they don't care. It's because they're just processing, what does that mean? And they might come back later and say, what's going to happen? Or they might just be listening, around the edges when you and your spouse are talking. So always tell the truth, but tell it small bites and let them ask for more.
Are you seeing a lot of substance abuse issues with families that has it increased, or,
Well, I know that it has increased. Overdose deaths have increased a lot, and people with overdoses showing up in the ED and not necessarily dying, it's a good thing, have gone up a lot. And people's alcohol intake, according to some large surveys, has gone up a lot. I'm not sure why, for whatever reason, in my personal practice in my little venue, I'm not seeing a ton of that directly.
Mhm.
But you know, substance abuse is a creeping problem too, right? So it could well be that um, there's more of it out there than we know about yet, and maybe it'll get better as the world opens up, or maybe it'll become worse and become more clear. So,
Mhm.
but just to be honest, I'm not personally seeing a ton of it. I'm seeing a ton of anxiety, seeing a ton of depression. I'm seeing an increase in eating disorders among teenagers. That was one thing that I wanted to mention,
Okay.
is that and not just me personally, this is also something that is being seen nationally, but that I have seen personally,
Mhm.
is people who haven't had eating disorders previously developing them, or people who've had kind of maybe subclinical, it getting a lot worse. And usually I am seeing mainly teenagers with that. Um, and there's lots of theories about why that might be. You know, is it the one thing that they can control in this out of control world?
Mhm.
Could be it. Is it that people are less active and throws off your appetite? Being out of your routine maybe throws off your normal eating habits, and that kind of maybe trigger a cascade of events. But
Mhm.
if you notice, you know, unusual restricting behavior on your teen's part, or any kind of disordered eating, you know, definitely bring them to the doctor, definitely address that. It's definitely something that, if you can get it earlier, is much, much easier to deal with.
Mhm. Mhm.
Speaking of that, you had mentioned the depression and the anxiety, in addition to eating disorders, have skyrocketed. We had a question: what is the difference between just being sad or frustrated, or how do you know when your child is just sad or frustrated or fed up and just spent versus depressed?
Yeah, that is a really important question. Um, One of the ways that you can tell is if your child is just like sad and frustrated and fed up, then when something positive does happen in their life, like a friend does come over, or the family does do an outing or something like that, they perk up, they respond, and they're more, so you can see that this is situational. And then doesn't mean it's not important that they're sad and frustrated. It's just not as worrisome. When a person is actually depressed, one of the signs of like clinical depression is not enjoying things that you normally enjoy. So if your sad, frustrated teenager also still seems sad and frustrated, even when his two favorite friends come over and, you know, you let them stay up late watching movies and eating junk food, and he's still sad, then you're like, something's going on here. And obviously anybody can have an off day, but when it's a pattern of days, I find with kids, that's one of the helpful ways I distinguish.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about some of your conversation earlier about expectations for our kids and the growth mindset. And I'm wondering about us as parents. And we've had some of these conversations amongst our friends that what happens when you, maybe from your own childhood, your own parents had high expectations, and you want to do things differently with your own children, but you are perpetuating a pattern. And a lot of this, I think, as we learn and grow as parents, we look back and we say, oh, I could have done that differently, or I should have been more laid back. Or, do you have any advice for us as parents as we're growing? And
Yeah. I mean, that's so true, isn't it? Like, gosh, there's so many things that we would have done differently or handled differently, because we're all just people going through our lives for the first time. Um, I think it's important to be compassionate with ourselves, that there is no parent who does it all right. And thank goodness our kids don't need us to do it all right. Kids are very, very resilient, especially if they have an adult in their life who's willing to kind of speak the truth to them. So even when you make a bad mistake with your kid, if afterwards you can say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was in a terrible frame of mind and I, was way too hard on you." Being honest like that lets the kid know, I'm not crazy. She was too hard on me yesterday. I can live with that, but it makes me feel better to know that, like, I'm not crazy, right? So my kind of rule of thumb is that, we all aim to be perfect parents all the time, and not even perfect, but just do the right things. We want to do the right things. Aim for 70%. If we can do mostly the right stuff about 70% of the time, there's a pretty wide shoulder on the road. They can put up with a lot of mistakes from us, especially if then we're honest about it and we say, "Oh, that didn't go too well. I was really tired. Sorry." Whatever the case may be. If it's like, you and I, Janet, when our kids are grown now and we're looking back 10 years and we're thinking, "Oh, I was too hard on them about this or that," we've got to be compassionate with ourselves. But I think if it's something that is really bugging you, I think it's okay to talk about it with your child, but don't try to get them to absolve you of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, we kind of would like that, right? We kind of like to say, "I know I was really hard on you about your, studying for your SATs or whatever. But like that was okay, wasn't it? You're okay, aren't you?" Don't ask them to absolve you. That doesn't help at all, even though that's what we'd love. If it's something that, really is bothering you, just say, "Gosh, I know I just was like out of control about the SATs and all that. I just was like, got so caught up in that worry about, you going to college and being able to fulfill your potential. But I realized now you were fine and I was just driving you crazy. I'm really sorry."
Yeah. Yeah, that is really helpful, really wise. Well, go ahead, Christy. Or
No.
you got,
Go ahead.
well, I see two remaining questions. One is the biggie of social media, and so sort of, and this person said that there's no specific question, but just that I think it's contributing to problems. And do you have any thoughts on it?
Yes. Social media is like a lot of things. It's good in moderation, and if you make good choices about it. It's kind of like food in a way. You don't want to have too much, and you want to pick the right stuff. So keep in mind that not all social media is alike. So texting with actual friends, or even Instagramming with actual friends, or certainly talking on the phone or FaceTiming with actual friends, is for the most part a positive thing. Scrolling through other people's Instagrams, maybe TikTok, although that tends to be a little bit more funny, but scrolling through people's curated lives is not very positive. It's junk food. It's like perfectly fun to do for a little bit, but it does not feed your brain or your soul. And too much of it, you end up feeling sick, because you're just watching other people only showing you their happy moments, and it just makes you feel like a loser. So I would really pay attention to like what my kid is actually doing on social media. And if it is actually connecting with real people, and that can even be for boys in particular, they're chatting while playing games sometimes. Now, I'm not saying that should be unlimited, but that's actual social interaction. And so that's a positive thing for the most part. The other stuff, not so much. So be aware and try to influence what they're actually doing. And if you're going to put restrictions on it, put more restrictions on the passive stuff, the curated stuff is what I'd say.
Huh.
However, even really good interactions like texting with a best friend, which is perfectly positive, that really needs to shut down overnight. So one of the big problems I'm seeing right now is teens and even young kids, not really little kids, but even like 9, 10, 11-year-olds who are staying up all night on their computer or on their phone because they don't have to get up in the morning, or just they don't all the time, just everything's gotten all mixed up. And their parents are so worried about them being isolated that they're just letting them do this 24/7, and they're staying up all night and being exhausted all day. And that has major social, cognitive, and physical implications. So I would say, you know, adults included, everybody should be shutting down their phone and their computer at bedtime. So, you know, depending on how old you are, obviously that's going to be a different time. But even teenagers should be, even if they stay up later than the parents do, which is often the case, they should have to drop their phone in a basket next to your bed by midnight or something like that. Some kids, there are some kids who can manage to shut their phone off in their room, but I'd say that's the rarity. It's like if you put a bowl of M&Ms in front of me, am I really going to stop eating them until you take it away? No. And, you know, kids getting texts in the middle of the night, most of them cannot resist that. So I really think it's best when all electronics get left like in the study overnight, or in mom and dad's room, or in a cupboard or something. And people have from, you know, 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. to sleep, to rest. The specific hours are going to vary, but make sure your kid is getting a chunk of rest time.
Wow.
Is there a magic age that you feel like, you know, of course, all children develop differently and mature differently, but is there an age that you think really this child, it's just not appropriate for them to have their own devices, as far as like a cell phone or?
Yeah, I don't have exactly a magic age. I would say before middle school, they really don't need them. They really don't. And I know a lot of parents who've done a really good job with this have just gotten really hammered this year when their kid got issued an iPad, right, from school. And all of that just started happening. And I've had so many people tell me, oh, it all just went out the window. So I know it's really, really tough. But I would say to try to not have them have their own cell phone, at least before middle school. They really don't need it before then, even socially. And it just, I don't know, you know, you can get tethered to it, and it can, we want our young kids to still be playing.
Mm.
Great. Makes sense.
That's really one of the, we were talking with some parents the other day, and it really struck me. One of our parents said that, you know, his dream was that his child would have their childhood back again, you know, that really, that was the goal. And I have one last question for you, Claudia. We are just so grateful for this. And you've already helped with this question. So the question is sort of, if you had your dream of what religious communities could do to really support the mental well-being for children, you know, what would you have us do? We are so concerned. Our whole staff, we talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
What would you have us do?
Yeah, well, one thing that comes to mind right away is I would really try to utilize the fact that you are a community of connected families. So like, you know, we had our bus stop, which was a community of connected families that, you know, met 5 days a week. And I know you may not meet that much, but you're a community of connected families. And so the more you can expose the children in your community to the other adults, that would be really helpful. And it doesn't have to be like huge numbers. I just mean that, like, I don't know if whether it's through religious education or whether it's through more informal, supper groups or pods, if some adults can make themselves available to a few other families' children, I think that, and this is not just something during the pandemic, this is something that Joe and I really believe strongly, that kids need adults other than their parents. They need their parents for sure. But, when kids can have a conversation with another adult who's not in that parent role, they can see how another person lives. They can sometimes hear another person's philosophy or opinion. And that's incredibly supportive. Like, especially if maybe things aren't going so well between the kid and the parent that week or that month. If they have another adult who they sometimes chat with, at church or at a supper group or at a picnic outside, that's an incredible buffer. Those connections are an incredible buffer. So I would just really take advantage of your community to try to provide those opportunities for kids.
That is fantastic. Yeah, that is. And it's such a sort of, you've just, for me, just such a reminder of what is the core of our being as a church, which is trying to be together and care for each other and grow together. And so thank you. And also just the way when you talked before about helping children deal with anxiety by giving them little ways to push through it, I think that's also something we could really do as a church. It's given a lot of meaning to what we're trying to do over the summer, and just maybe to just provide ways for children to come together, or families to come together in little snippets and re-enter.
I think that would be really, really helpful to a lot of families.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful, Claudia, and this was a treasure for us, and Christy and I and all the clergy pastoral staff, we want so much to support our families around mental health and well-being, and this is really a great inspiration for us. And I want to make sure everybody knows that tomorrow night there's another Allen coming to share wisdom, and that's Joe Allen, who's a professor of psychology at UVA. So please join us the same time tomorrow night at 7:30. And Claudia, thank you.
You are so welcome. I'm honored to be asked to chat with you guys, and it's been a pleasure. Your questions are so right on. Your community is so lucky to have you both. So thank you.
Thank you. And I want to say to everybody, we plan to have follow-up conversations to these nights. We want to provide some gatherings for parents where we can all sit together and debrief and add more questions and maybe dream about ways we can support each other. So stay tuned, everybody. We're going to we'll have follow-ups to these nights, and I'd like to close us in prayer. Let us pray. God, you are the source of all life and love. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this night. Thank you for all that Claudia has shared with us and the inspiration to keep being together and supporting each other. We pray again for all children, and all parents, that no one will ever feel alone, and that love will be the source of every action that we do. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. And
don't forget,
Thank you.
If you have any other questions, we can, if you just email us, we can try to include some in tomorrow night's discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and Claudia wants you to send really hard questions for Joe.
Absolutely. Stump